And Dodgers, believe it or
Director of
not.
Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics this evening because we have as our guest Robert Brokish, who's running for state rep out of Rockford, that's the 67th district. He is the Republican candidate for state rep. He's running against Chuck Jefferson, who's been in that district now he's been representing that district for 10 years. He is the 10-year Democratic incumbent. But look, if you don't live in Rockford, if you live, say, in Aurora, you live in Chicago, you live downstate, where we often show, don't change that station, because we're going to be talking of interest to you no matter where you live, even if you live outside the state. The big issues across the country are really quite similar on the state side: spending, taxes, deficits, pensions, education, public safety, jobs, economic development. So if that interests you, stay tuned. And even if it doesn't, we're going to make it interesting. Start out by asking Robert Brokish.
Yes, sir.
Is a tax increase inevitable, do you think? A state income tax increase, state sales tax increase, a major tax increase of, say, $3 to $4 billion, is that inevitable in a state that is said to have a deficit of about $12 billion?
Well, if it's inevitable, it's only inevitable at the hands of a lame duck session. If we take the 12 seats necessary and take the gavel from Mike Madigan, I can pretty much assure you that for my part, I will stand firmly against a tax increase.
You will. And so how will you would like to see a Republican majority in the House?
Indeed, I would.
A Republican majority in the Senate?
Don't know if that's feasible. We'd have to run the table.
But you would like to see it. I'm saying you're predicting.
It's mathematically possible.
You're saying it's more likely to get a Republican majority in the House at this election, November 2nd, 2010, Indeed. Than it is to get a Republican majority in the Senate.
I believe so, yes.
And what do you think the odds are of having a Republican governor elected on November 2nd, Bill Brady over Pat Quinn?
I think they're getting better on a daily basis.
But right now, would you say it's even if you were a betting person between Brady and Quinn?
I think Brady's got the edge right now. Yeah. Even if you take into account some of the polls that favor the Republican candidates, even if you shave back a few points, he's still coming out ahead.
So tell me, if the Republicans sweep the House, sweep the legislature, Republican majority in the House and in the Senate, and they put a Republican back in the gubernatorial mansion as they had from 76 to 2002, right?
Pretty long run there, yes.
Yeah, so Bill Brady's there, and he has a majority. What does he do to adjust the $12 billion deficit?
Well,
because you're saying he won't raise taxes, you're right?
I've spoken with him. I've heard him speak on other fine shows such as this, and I never hear him advocate a tax increase. He tends to talk in terms of across-the-board cuts, those sorts of things. On a personal level, I think we're better off if we use a more surgical precision in our cutting rather than broad-based cuts.
So you disagree with Bill Brady in terms of you wouldn't have a 10% across-the-board cut?
I'm just
in spending across the board, and that's a $55 billion budget, so he would be estimating that he'll cut spending by about $5.5 billion.
That's probably a good ballpark estimate. I'm a big fan of the 2011 solutions package put forward by the Illinois Policy Institute. They went through things with a fine-tooth comb. Some areas left the same from Governor Quinn's proposals, some cut, some completely zeroed out. And I think that sort of— How
much did they cut from the General Revenue Fund budget in that 2011
They removed the entire deficit. They turned it all over in one cycle.
The General Revenue Fund currently is about $27 billion, right?
In round numbers, yes.
And did they cut it down to 22? Is that what you're saying?
They actually end up, believe it or not, with a minuscule surplus of some few $1,000s.
Actually, they don't borrow to make the pension payment of $4 billion, so they cut other spending, which allows them, I think, to make the pension payment, them being the Illinois Policy Institute, with John Tillman as the executive director.
Quite so.
So I think that's what it is. They've got about a $27 billion budget, counting the spending of the pension payment. Is that right? Sound right to you?
Those are the figures I've looked at.
So it means they cut other spending other than pension spending by about $4 billion, I think, which would allow them to make that pension payment without borrowing, right?
Yes, it's a serious
budget. You go along with that. That's what you would like to see done. You would vote for that budget if the Illinois Policy Institute sent over the budget to the legislature, to the governor, they were all Republicans, majority, Brady. Brady says, let's adopt this. You were there. You'd unequivocally give your vote for that budget.
As it is, no. There are some points where I'd like to see a little more in one department and a little more away from another department. But as far as the zero come...
So where would you like to see more? More spending or more cuts?
A combination.
Where would you like to see more spending than is in the Illinois Policy Institute?
I would like to see greater cuts on the administrative side of public education.
What's the administrative side?
Things like regional superintendents and all those levels of red tape that are between a student and a teacher. I'd like to see more of that.
Does that save you much, though? Isn't that relatively small?
It's a matter of investment. I would like to see as much money as possible where the rubber meets the road in the classroom.
But that doesn't save you a great deal. You could abolish the whole State Board of Education. What does it save you?
Some of those machines are zeroed out in the Policy Institute's proposal.
Okay. But I'm just saying, if you went further, you're not talking about big savings in terms of cutting administrative spending.
Just fine-tuning. I think the Policy Institute's proposal as it is by and large spot on.
Okay. And is there anything, you said there were some things you would spend more on and maybe cut a little less. What would those be?
I think we need to, well, by way of example, we failed as a state to ask for waivers to fine-tune Medicaid and education as part of the strings attached to some federal funding. I think that was a mistake. I think we put too much of a burden on the non-Medicaid social spending. I was just recently at a forum where some of the concerns of the autism constituency and other special needs people were completely ignored, and they're suffering. I think they should be considered to have some money put back on their ledgers because they've given away more than their share.
And so those areas you would spend a little more on for autism and other things?
Similar disabilities.
And you're saying, would you cut more than Medicaid, into Medicaid than was done under the Illinois Policy Institute budget?
Yes, under the assumption that we apply for and receive those waivers that would allow us more latitude in our adjustments, absolutely, I would go into that.
Okay. What does the waiver do for the state of Illinois?
Well, it basically takes the shackles off that were put on by the federal.
Well, specifically, what shackles would you like to see removed?
Well, for example, eligibility reform. We have a problem with Medicaid returning your eligibility on an annual basis is under no scrutiny whatsoever.
And what isn't, you mean, is the income level for eligibility, what is it now? Is it 40,000, 60,000?
Yeah, I don't have problems with the eligibility per se. I have problems with the fact that people receive a re-enrollment form in the mail, and they are essentially the guardians of their own eligibility.
I mean, nobody's checking to see if they're
quite so
providing it accurately. Well, what is the eligibility for Medicaid now in Illinois? Is it 60,000 or 80,000? Do you know what it is?
I think it's a little under 60. Yeah,
okay.
it's not.
So you can't have an income above, say, 58 or some 58,000.
I think that's for a family of four.
For a family of four. Okay, and you're okay with that as eligibility?
That's a good starting point. My beef is that we have a lot of people who get in and never get out again.
Okay. So going back to the overall, the big picture, I think I got it right. I think that the Illinois Policy Institute proposed budget that balances. They do it by cutting, I think, $4 or $5 billion in the operating deficit, which makes the operating deficit in balance, right? But I think when people say a $12 billion deficit, they're talking about an operating deficit of, depending on how they look at it, from $5 to $6 billion. But then there's also $6 billion of leftover bills.
Exactly. There's the unpaid. There's that fluidity to it.
So the difference is with the operating budget, you're trying to close that so you don't have a continuous recurring of a deficit, and as Illinois Policy Institute has done. But then you're left with the $6 billion of non-recurring expenses that were simply shifted over from last year and the year before, right?
Yeah, bill payment is key.
And how does the Illinois Policy Institute take care of that?
Well, they prioritize it. You know, there's a triage
to
this.
Where do they get the money to pay the $6 billion in local bills?
Well, it's all done through the cutting. I mean, the cuts are very drastic. I don't know if you've read them.
Are you sure it's all done through the cutting? I mean, is some of it coming out in the future? If they get more revenue, if revenue exceeds expenses in the future, not they, but the Illinois state government, isn't that the way it sort of resolves some of the deficit,
Well,
some of underfunded liabilities?
Some of it is coming through freezing, and then through the allowance of inflation, catching up to that budgetary freeze, and you have some
Because they're not cutting
incorporated
$12 billion in spending for this or next fiscal year, are they?
For the most part, yes.
$12 billion in spending? Okay.
A lot of areas are zeroed out.
And where does most of that spending that you're the $12 billion that you're saying the Illinois Policy Institute cuts, where is it cut mostly?
There's not one area that is immune. Many areas are...
Does education go down much in spending?
Actually, education, in comparison to Governor Quinn's proposals, comes out about the same.
About the same. So no cuts in education, and Medicaid is cut by, what, 10 or 15%?
Also, it assumes that there are some policy changes that will take place that will allow greater investigation of fraud. Those sorts of procedural changes have to be part and parcel of this proposal.
Okay. And they, of course, the Illinois Policy Institute doesn't propose any tax increase, right?
No.
But they anticipate in future years, by running the state government better and more efficiently, that will promote stability in business in the private sector, and you'll have greater growth. Is that what they're saying?
Improved credit rating, all those
so you have more
tertiary...
growth. So you will get increased revenue, perhaps, not by increased taxes, but by spurring economic growth. So the tax rate doesn't go up, but the revenue does, as the economy in Illinois does better.
A la
sort of
the Laffer curve, quite so.
You believe in the Laffer curve?
Well, I think it is intrinsically logical. The saying, many hands make light work. I think that that follows in tax policy. If you have more people earning money, you don't have to go to any one group of that people for a greater percentage.
So, but what does the Laffer curve say in essence?
Well, the Laffer curve says, in essence, that as revenues are increasing, the state is going to bring more in as people are earning more, businesses growing. If we crunch down on businesses and instead get that money by taking a greater piece of their pie, we end up with less revenue because we're essentially killing off the goose that lays the golden egg.
So it's saying if you plot on one axis the tax rate for the state, say the income tax rate, and the other tax revenue, that initially as you raise tax rates, revenue goes up, but then at some point you continue to raise the tax rate, revenue will actually fall. Right?
The law of diminishing returns.
Well, and fewer people are working, and people are less willing to work, save, and invest because you're taking too much of their money. So even though the state is getting a larger share of each dollar earned, fewer dollars are being earned.
Quite so.
That's right. Okay. And you agree with that?
I do.
And your opponent is Chuck Jefferson, right?
Yes,
He's
he
a
is.
Democrat, right?
Quite.
You ever talk with him? You think he opposes or doesn't think the Laffer curve works?
I don't speak with him in great policy detail. I always make it a point that if we're at the same event to be cordial and good afternoon, Chuck, and
So
shake his hand.
Never really talked to him substance?
No.
Do you have any sense, though? He's been there 10 years. You live in Rockford, right?
Yes, I do. Rockford native, born and bred.
Okay, and you live on the west side of Rockford, right?
I do indeed.
All right. So are you a constituent of Mr. Jefferson?
Have been for the whole time he's been in office.
All right. So you've had a chance to see him. And
I have indeed.
is your sense that he disagrees with what you've said about the Laffer curve?
My sense is that if you were to engage him in a substantive discussion on the Laffer curve, macroeconomics, and all those sorts of things, he might be hard-pressed to articulate an opinion or position.
He might be.
I think so. He was...
You mean you don't think he knows what the Laffer curve is about?
His history is he was appointed to the post. He did not initially seek the post. He came in from the county board, filled a vacancy when the prior representative became mayor of Rockford. In a nutshell, he's been opposed one time.
One time in the general election?
2002, he had an opponent. He's been unopposed for 3 cycles now.
Has not been opposed in the primary?
He's had no primary opponent to my knowledge, no.
Okay, and only once in the last 10 years?
That is correct.
He's been opposed in the general election?
That is correct.
These Republicans think it's a pretty Democratic district, or what?
Yeah, and shame on the Republicans. I've gone that extra mile to make it abundantly clear that if we as a Republican Party are going to believe in entrepreneurship, strengthening the family, all these sorts of things that are on our platform, if we don't take that message to the part of Rockford that most desperately needs to hear that message, then we're hypocrites. And that's what my candidacy is about. A lot of the opinion makers, the conventional wisdom purveyors, just shook their head when they heard about my candidacy. Said, no, we need to do this.
Well, What's the ethnic or racial composition of the 67th district?
It's a majority white district. However, the minority percentage is a little higher than average. If you combine Hispanic, African American, and Asian, you come out in round numbers, 25, 28%.
If you combine African American, Hispanic, and Asian, 28%.
Yeah, maybe closer to 30.
30.
That 5% range, 25 to 30.
About 70% white, is that what you're saying?
White.
Okay. And is race a fairly important factor, or ethnicity? Or?
Not for me. It's not at all.
Not for you, but in terms of voting. I mean, why have the Republicans not put up a nominee? Why do they think it's so difficult? Sometimes people say race is a factor. Chuck Jefferson is African American, right?
He is indeed.
Often people say it's hard, if certainly somebody's white, if a district is predominantly African American, to win. Not possible, but in this case, it's not. Race wouldn't seem to be a major factor because the African American vote is relatively small, right?
Well, it's
relative to other districts. I mean, even combining the Hispanic vote, if you said that vote is voting as a block, it's still 30%.
Asian. Oh, you're right. And where the rubber meets the road is what I like to call the old school Union Democrat white constituency, who for generations worked for many of the factories that have since closed and left town. They are, by and large, top of the ticket Ds, but mid-ticket, they'll vote for Congressman Manzullo, they'll vote for State Senator Severson. And it's my hope that I'll be tapping into some of that also, cross-ticket voting.
But I guess the party itself in the past has thought that's not the case, so they didn't bother putting up a nominee.
Well, it's also hard to find one.
I mean, is that right?
Frankly.
I mean, is that? I'm just trying to get at the thinking. Tom Cross, he's the House Republican leader.
Indeed, he is.
Right. So 2 years ago, do you think it was Tom Cross who said, it's not going to work here, we're just not going to waste our scarce resources to find a nominee?
I don't think it even went that far up the flagpole, to be honest. A lot of these candidate searches, if you will, take place at the party level, and it is hard to find.
Well, Cross is heading that up, isn't he? When you say at the party level, he's
I mean at the county
party
party level.
Oh, county.
At the county party level.
So it would be the Winnebago County Republican chairman. Who would that be?
Jan Kloss.
Okay, Jan just probably thought it wasn't worth it here.
Well, she has kind of the deck stacked against her in the sense that oftentimes you look to your base of precinct committeemen to farm team your candidates for county board and aldermen and such. And
she didn't have anybody on the farm?
The west side is very bereft of sitting precinct committeemen, as opposed to the east side.
But you are a sitting precinct committeeman. You've been
one of the few, one of the proud.
Active in Winnebago County politics.
Since I came on board back in 2008, yes.
Were you active in politics before then?
No, I've always been a strong conservative. But I've never been one to participate or self-identify as one party or the other. And that really changed for me in 2008. Things just got out of control, out of hand, too many ad hominem attacks. And that's when I decided, well, it's time to take a stand and start moving the ball forward.
So you're kind of new to politics is what you're telling me.
Very much so.
You think you're naive about this?
I am an idealist, but I'm not an ideologue. I have my groundings, my beliefs, but I understand that at the end of the day, to get legislation passed, there has to be some sort of give and take. I'm just from the point of view that...
Well, are you conservative or are you not?
I'm extraordinarily conservative.
But why aren't you an ideologue then?
Well, because that doesn't...
I mean, I don't say that in a pejorative way. Isn't an ideologue just a person who has an ideology? Or is it different?
I think there's a certain pejorative aspect to it where you want to ram that ideology
Okay, but you have an ideology, but you want to persuade other people to join you.
Exactly.
If they haven't already.
Exactly.
And you think you can win this race? You think you can go out to the 67th district, which represents 2/3 of Rockford, right?
Absolutely.
East side, most of the west side, all of the west side?
It's the entirety of the west side.
And part of the east side?
Well, the central portion, the old town, as I would call it, and then the south side all the way down to the county line with Ogle County. So there's some ag business down there too.
And you think you can go out there, African American, Hispanic, Asian, white, win them all, right?
Well,
Isn't that what you think? I mean, you do think this, right? Or
I'm a mathematical realist, and I have no illusions that I'm going to take 80% of the African American vote. However, if I can get 20% of the African American vote, that is game, set, and match.
Why is that? I mean, we have an African American president. What percentage of the white vote did he win when he was running? Do you know?
I do not know nationwide.
Probably not the majority, right? But a substantial number, much higher than 20%, right?
Certainly enough to put him over the top.
Yeah, more than 20%. You would agree?
Absolutely.
Couldn't win with only 20% of the white vote, maybe 40, 45%. So if Barack Obama could get, I don't know, 40 to 45% of the white vote nationally, why can't somebody like Robert Brokish get 40 to 45% of the African American vote in Rockford?
Well, I don't say it's not impossible.
Well, what's the barrier to doing it? You mean Obama was a better candidate? You're telling me?
Obama had more time to campaign. I'm a working man, and I'm busy at my place of employment for as much as 60 hours a week.
Would you say you can identify with people who work for a living because you do? In the private sector, right?
Certainly so.
Have you always worked in the private sector?
Yes, I have. Never had a government paycheck in my life.
All right. And you work now for Woodward Inc., right?
Yes, I do.
What do they make?
Well, globally they make a great many things, but at that facility they focus on what I like to colloquially refer to as fuel injector systems for jet engines, in layman's terms.
Yeah, and everybody knows about fuel injectors because they're fuel injectors for carburetors in automobiles, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Without going into all that, but you're a calibration technician?
I make sure that the instruments with which they test those components are accurate.
So you're a working guy?
Yes, indeed.
You can identify with these others?
I can.
You're not a senior executive in high-level management who wouldn't have the faintest idea what it means to work for a living?
Well,
if you say that senior executives don't work for a living, I don't want to alienate everybody.
There are some who perhaps have those issues.
Okay. All right. So getting back, you can identify with those folks. A lot of this is going to be money. How much money do you think you have to run this race?
Right now I think our latest expenditures were floating around a few $1,000s. So
yeah. So you can't win with that.
We have to be economically minded in our expenditures.
So the party's not supporting you?
I wouldn't go so far as to say that. They're still under the wait and see whether or not they're going to come riding in with the cavalry at the 11th hour.
If you can put up some numbers in the polls, then they'll throw you some money, right?
Yes, I've been told
that. When I say that would be House Republican leader Tom Cross?
Well, it's mostly handled at the political operative level, the House Republican organization. And
HRO? Right. Well, who runs that?
Kevin Artle is.
Doesn't he report to Tom Cross?
Well,
I mean, Kevin tells Tom what to do?
I don't know about that, but the higher up the food chain you are, the more you rely on the intelligence to come to you rather than going out and getting it yourself.
We'll have to have Kevin on the show, and he can tell us what's going on in the Republican Party in the state of Illinois, right?
Well, he's a pretty busy guy, but I'm sure he'd be happy to squeeze you in.
You think he'd appear here?
I can't speak for Kevin, but I'm having a very enjoyable time.
All right, so back to the issues here. You oppose any tax increase, right?
I do. I think it's a business killer.
You'd like to see spending cut in a variety of areas to be more efficient, right?
Broad-based.
And you think that your opponent, Chuck Jefferson, would like to see taxes increased, and did he vote for the $4 or $5 billion tax increase that was proposed in the House but didn't pass?
He did indeed. I have him on the record as saying he thinks the tax increase at that time was a good idea and should be implemented.
And how much would that have increased the individual income tax, the one that he voted for?
If you want to talk with the golden standard of $50,000 family of four average, mom and pop kind of thing, they talk about an extra $500 on top of the $1,500 said hypothetical families already paying.
Okay, but for Quinn says for families under $60,000 in income, under his proposal, which I think was the proposal in the House that didn't pass, those folks wouldn't pay anymore. Is Quinn right?
I'd have to run those numbers. I don't think there's anything good about a tax increase.
Even if the bottom 60% in income, or even if people with incomes less than $60,000 don't face an increase in taxes, you're still not supporting that?
I am, because I've never been given a paycheck by a poor man. We have to take into account who signs the paychecks.
So you're saying some of those folks are going to lose their jobs when you cut the income of people over $200,000 because they're running small businesses. They're going to cut back unemployment.
Assuredly so.
Okay. Would you sell things? Do you think that's a way to maybe cure the deficit? Sell the lottery, get $8 billion. It doesn't. It gives you some leeway as you cut spending and cut taxes and time for those things to kick in. So Dan Proft, who I think proposed a sale of the lottery when he was running for governor.
I consider Dan Proft a good friend of mine. As a matter of fact.
So you agree with him on that? Sale of the lottery, $8 billion?
I think we need to look at first leasing, long-term leases. I don't think we want to lose control of the assets.
Long-term lease, that would generate $8 billion. You'd certainly consider and perhaps favor.
I don't have any problem with long-term leases especially for things like the lottery.
All right. Major areas people say for reform to really get at spending in the state of Illinois: education, pensions, healthcare, right?
And also the way government works. I think I'm not a big fan of term limits. We have term limits. It's called the elections. Yeah. I am, however, a strong advocate for term limiting offices within the machine of Springfield. House Speaker, that should be limited in my opinion. Committeemanships, and on the other side, the minority party representative. These should all be limited. That's where a lot of, I think, inertia bogs us down.
So you'd limit the term of Speaker of the House?
Oh yes, I'm in favor of that.
What, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years?
6 years I think is a good starting point.
Okay. But in terms of spending, if you have to, I know you said you favor the Illinois Policy Institute proposed budget, assuming for some reason that doesn't fly and you had to make other cuts. Would you approach it with the idea that education, pensions, and health care, Medicaid, those are the main areas to look for?
Those are the areas
for spending cuts?
Those are the areas to look for. The golden rule, if you will, from my point of view, is an investment mentality. This state should be run like a corporation. The taxpayers are the shareholders of said corporation. Anything that is spent at the executive committee, the CEO, the chairman of the board, et cetera, needs to have a return on that investment. Education, if properly executed, is an excellent opportunity for investment return. A lot of other areas of state government, not so much so.
Well, when you say investment return, would you favor more charter schools than we currently have?
More charter schools and better funding of the charter schools we have. Much to the detriment of my opponent, Rockford is behind the curve on charter school development. We're playing catch up, and we should have been at that table years ago.
Right now, I think in the city of Chicago, they have about 7% of the schools, 7% of the students, I believe, are in charter schools. Well, what is it in Rockford, do you know?
It's minuscule. We don't even have a K through 12 program.
So you would go down to the legislature and push for more charter schools, especially for Rockford, right?
That, vouchers as well.
School vouchers, school choice, fully funded school vouchers?
Absolutely.
Because in Chicago, people don't realize they spend on the public schools there about $15,000 per kid per year. What do they spend in the public schools in Rockford, do you know?
It's a little bit less than that.
Would you say 12,000 maybe?
12,000. As a matter of fact, since I left high school, the cost of an education is quadrupled.
Okay, so if it's $12,000 per kid per year in your district, in the 67th district, would you like to see those parents given that full amount, a voucher, and says, if you want, take the $12,000 and go to the private school of your choice?
We can almost educate 2 to 1 based on the current market
in
a lot of the private
schools.
That's
6,000. You would. But just to be fair, because some people think, you know, maybe that's a little too tough on private schools. They would be forced to educate a child for $6,000 when the public schools are saying $12,000, or receiving $12,000. So assuming that were the case, would you like to see that fully funded voucher give the parent the total amount that the parent is receiving now in education in kind, and they could take that money and go to the school of their choice?
The Illinois Constitution requires us to educate our children. It says nothing against outsourcing that education, which vouchers essentially are.
So you're signing on to a fully funded school voucher?
Oh, I think it breaks the monopoly that we currently suffer under.
And so when it came up, Senator Meek's bill, which was school vouchers, was school choice, passed the Senate, but that's Reverend Meeks, Senator Meeks.
Yes,
but it didn't pass the House. A number of Republicans didn't support that.
Largely rural ones.
But you would have supported that if you were in the State House.
Oh,
school voucher, school
it would
choice.
be remiss for me as representing that particular part of Rockford to not support that bill.
Chuck Jefferson, you don't think he would support vouchers?
He did not. He voted against it.
All right, we'll continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank our guest, Robert Brokish. All right?
Absolutely.